Hi everyone, Ashley Mailloux here with the Daily Racing Forum, taking a look at a pick 3 sequence for Sunday, October 19th. Going to focus in on Keeneland. They have a 9-race program. We'll look at the late pick 3 here, starting in race number 7, which is a first level allowance for the 3-year-olds and upward, a distance of 1 1/8 miles here on the main track. And in terms of this field of 9, very curious to see how it plays out on Sunday in terms of the wagering, because the 9 Excite is favored. And I actually have a feeling that the 4 Only in America could take a little bit more play, and that's where I'll kick things off. Only in America, trained by Todd Pletcher, a 3-year-old son of Constitution. He's got an interesting progression. You look at him on debut down at Gulfstream Park. He was a distant second, but second to Burnham Square, who dominated. We know what his resume has turned out to be in the last several months since then. And then Only in America was a distant third. Second time out, he was further back, changed tracks, went from Gulfstream to the fairgrounds, and then obviously had something go amiss in April. But they gave him time to regroup. They regrouped at Saratoga, going a mile. And I loved the performance. I know it wasn't a huge field, but he sat close to it. He stalked. He made a run. And he ended up drawing clear, and the Beyer speed figure obviously catches one eye. 93 ended up being the figure that came back, so now I have to be kind of a little bit curious now, second off the freshening, what is in store for him, and I think he could actually take a step forward. I don't see this being necessarily a bounce candidate. So the 1 1/8 trip is going to be the furthest that he's ever gone, but I like his style, so I am going to make him my top pick. But when I went through the field, I thought the 7 Racing Driver was certainly a horse that I would want on my ticket at 10-1. He is 3 for 9 in his career. He comes into this race fresh off a win. It was at Churchill. It was at the distance at 1 1/8 miles. He got an 84 Beyer speed figure, and I liked that he was able to sit, and he kind of had a tip wide at one point, and he still draws clear, and I understand he was favored, and you can look at that allowance race and look at the conditions. You can read it a couple of times to wrap your head around it. So not necessarily sure what he faced there, but I liked the way that he did it. Obviously, back in June, though, he faced several, Excite, Fountain Lake, and he was 4th best there. So we'll see. I think he's another one. Second off a layoff, he's a little curious, and in terms of his trip, the one thing that I do think he will need is some sort of pace help. When you look at his races outside of the 1 1/8 miles, the other 2 wins, he got the trip at the 7 Ace. They went 22, 45, and 1 to the opening quarter, and then the win at a mile, 23, 46, and 1. So his running style means that he's going to need some pace, but I actually think he might get the setup that he needs. So I found him very intriguing at this price. We will move to race number 8, which is the Sunday feature at Keeneland. It's the Grade 3 Dowager for the fillies and mares. It's on the turf course at 1.5 miles. And recently we had the other 1.5 mile race. I think it was the Sycamore. I thought that was more wide open than this race, and I'm going to get very skinny here. I'm going to single, and I did a preview with Gina Bacola specifically on the Dowager, and you can hear me make the case that I'm going to make again. I like the 2 Spanish Eyes. I know there are things maybe not to like. The fact that she's had 4 starts here. She hasn't been able to kind of break through and get a win in 2025, but I'm of the mindset that there are things to kind of nitpick at and maybe to draw the line through. I think the debut can be very tough for horses. You never know what you're getting, especially off a long layoff. Just very different surroundings all the way around. And she ran fine. Obviously, she took a lot of play, though. And then in her next 2 starts, I actually loved her performance at Delaware and at Colonial because, sure, they weren't big fields, but she absolutely ran against it, knowing that both of those winners, Marksman's Queen and Charlene Stream, they took them gate to wire. So I think she ran very well, even though she was defeated. And then you can look at her Kentucky Downs race, and you can decide what to do with it. We talk about it all the time. I think a lot of us here, when we make these videos, sometimes you just have to draw a line through the Kentucky Downs races, and some horses love it, some hate it. Obviously, it was by far her most disappointing start since coming to North America, so I will forgive her for that. I think kind of looking at her races at 1 mile 3/8 or even 1 mile 3/16, I think extra ground is actually going to help her as well, and you can see she has experience going 1.5 miles. I know it wasn't one of her best performances, but I do think based on her style and what we've seen, a little extra ground will not hurt her. So I will single Spanish Eyes. We'll move to the nightcap, race number 9 in the program, a 2-year-old event, maiden special weight, 6 furlongs, Colton Geldings on the main track. And this is where I think I wanted more coverage. It's not a ton of coverage because I do think typically when I assess these races, unless there is something really jumping off the page pedigree-wise or maybe connections or the work tab. I do usually find that the horses that have some race day experience have the slight edge, and I think that is the case with the number 5, Trouble Calling, 7-2 on the morning line, a son of Dialed In, trained by Greg Foley, who was 3rd on the debut. And you look at the field, it was at Churchill, a big field, sort of ended up being mid-pack, dropped back, and then rallied, beaten by 4 1/4 lengths, got a 76 buyer for the debut. I think that sort of performance to me was good. I watched the replay 2 times. I think he showed enough to suggest that he will be better now with a start under his belt. And I personally like that they haven't overtrained him in terms of published drills. Sometimes we see 2 or 3 after that. They've just gone with the one at Churchill, and it was 47 flat. And look at his other works. This is a step up in terms of the works. And this is sort of a pattern that you can kind of see for these connections. They're not necessarily working every 7 days. And kind of like that here for Trouble Calling. So do think he's the horse to beat, but there were a couple of firsters that I'll look at. The number 8, Lay Down the Law, son of Tis the Law, who obviously does well with the firsters. You can look at the 2-year-olds. I think it's 15%. I think first-time starters in general, 17%. Pricey purchase back in May of 2025 for $775,000. Mentioned the top side, the bottom side, Janice's Joy. I know you can look at her races and say, well, what did she face? She had some good numbers, and you look at her, she's, 6th place. She finished 2nd on debut on the turf. She graduated next time out. Just a hardy race mare, and she's been able to throw some foals that have been competitive early, which is something that I like. I know that Peter Urton necessarily doesn't have this huge stat for the first-time starters, but I like the workout tab. I like the pedigree. I like that you're getting Johnny Velasquez aboard, who we know has had just tremendous success at this fall meet. 15-1. I'm going. I'm going to use this horse on my ticket. The other firster that I will use is the 12, Something Dangerous. This one by Yopon, who was trained by Steve Asmussen. This one also trained by Steve Asmussen. He was a sprinter, and his first-time starters are rolling, absolutely rolling, 22% from a sample size of 53. Bottom side of the pedigree, you might remember the name, Gas Station Sushi. She was 3 for 4 in her career, graded stakes winner. I know the works necessarily aren't the most eye-catching, but I think if you kind of cherry pick and you go back, you can see some better works in terms of the times. You get Jose Ortiz. I will say, though, I don't necessarily like post 12 for this first-time starter, but certainly one of the stronger pedigrees in the field. So we will take a look at my ticket, top to bottom here. Just 2 deep in the opening leg. I mentioned I think the 4, Only in America, actually could go off favored. I'll use the 4 and the 7. The 7's my price. Race 8, the feature, the Dowager. I'm going to single the number 2, Spanish Eyes. I think this is the race where we will see her find the winner's circle for the first time since coming to North America. And then finally, the 2-year-old maiden special weight event. I wanted some coverage. I think the 5, Trouble Calling, has that race day edge. But from the pedigrees and things that I noticed in the past performances in terms of works and connections, I found the 8 and the 12 out of the first-time starters to be the most intriguing to me. So in terms of the minimum, can play $1 pick 3 here for $6, so a very affordable ticket. But don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I mentioned it, Gino and I, we did preview the Dowager in full, and I'm very curious to see the comments. Who do you like? Do you think there are any singles in the sequence? What pedigrees caught your eye in that 2-year-old maiden special weight? Leave a comment below, and as always, best of luck this weekend.